Zusunta sicher.
Hello, beautiful star seeds and light workers. It's Alexander Quinn, and if you felt off today, more than usual, like something has suddenly intensified, you would not be imagining it. Because what's happening right now is not just the after effect of the equinox, but there is also incredibly significant energies interacting with the Earth's field in real time as of the last just 48 hours, when the sun decided to unleash more of its energy. And the reason this feels so strong is because it's landing on top of a system that's already passed through a major balance point on the 20th, on the equinox. So what many of you are feeling right now is not just one thing, it's a continuation and an amplification of what we've just moved straight through. If you felt dizzy, foggy, emotional, like something in your body wasn't quite right, then don't worry, you wouldn't be imagining it. But what's happening right now after the equinox is even more important because something has just shifted. Not just mentally or emotionally, but also physically. Some of you can already feel it. A clarity is returning. A lightness is beginning to come back into the body. Or it can even just present itself as a deep knowing that something now has to change. And there is a very specific reason this happens after the equinox. In the last video, I spoke about the build-up into this point, the pressure, the fatigue, the emotional intensity. But now that we've actually passed through it, the system behaves differently. And that's what many of you are starting to notice now, because what just happened wasn't symbolic. It was actually energetically, shall we say, mechanical in its nature at the energetic level. And the equinox is a precise turning point in the Earth's system. The moment where the planet reaches exact balance with the sun, where light and darkness equalize and the field stabilizes, and your body exists inside that field. Your nervous system is responding to it at all times. And that's why the lead up felt so intense. And some of you were feeling the dizziness, the pressure in the head, even the chest, the brain, the fog, the brain fog, the emotional waves, the strange slowing down of everything. And that was by no means not random at all. That was the compression phase in action. The system was literally being pulled towards equilibrium. And when that happens, it exposes what is, shall we say, unstable first. Old emotions are going to surface. Patterns rise. Things you've been holding on to become harder to carry. And that's why many people felt like they were potentially breaking down before they were ready to break through. Because the equinox does not begin with movement, it actually begins with balance. And balance is not always comfortable. Well, when the system has been carrying distortion or when consciousness is buffering against resistance, it's a lot to change that. And that's what this energy is doing at this moment in time. But now that the equinox has passed and the direction of the energy has changed, because once the system reaches equilibrium, the pressure reverses. Let's say the inward compression ends and the outward movement then begins. And that is where everything starts to change, because outward moving energy then creates clarity, it creates momentum, and it creates action. And this is why people who felt scrambled before are now beginning to feel slowly clearer, calmer, and more certain about what now needs to change, and more aware of what is no longer sustainable. The pressure phase is beginning to end. Well, officially ended on the 20th. And the release part of that energy is now beginning. And that is why it feels so noticeable, because the equinox does not change your life. What it does is it reveals where change is already required. And so, what is tolerable before now feels impossible. What was unclear becomes more defined. What was delayed begins to now move when it maybe felt stuck before. And what you were avoiding becomes much harder to now ignore in this energy. And this is happening personally, it's happening collectively, because when a system passes its balance point, it begins expressing what was already building underneath. And that's why things that were hidden begin surfacing now. Things under pressure begin showing strain. And decisions that were, shall we say, delayed begin happening more easily now. Because when resolution increases, distortion can no longer hide. Something that those of follow my work, I say this often in my posts. And this is where the split now intensifies. Yeah, lots of people talking about 3D and 5D timelines. That's a bit of a sweeping generalization, but for some this will feel like relief, and for others it will bring pressure, because clarity strengthens where awareness is chosen, and pressure increases where resistance remains. Because, I'm just going to say it again, clarity strengthens where awareness is chosen, and pressure increases where resistance remains. So some of you are probably wondering, what happens next? The movement phase now begins. Not all at once, but steadily. Over the next few weeks, clarity will continue increasing. Tolerance will drop, misalignment will become harder to carry, and you will start to see people making decisions faster now. You'll begin to see externally what the energy has already been doing internally. As I've said in videos before, our consciousness of how we feel internally is a projection out into the real world. What we see in our holographic matrix as lived experience. And so, in simple terms, the equinox was the turning point. The lead up was the pressure. The equinox created the balance, and now the release is revealing what was already true, so it can begin playing out in your reality. So what you're feeling now isn't confusion, if it still feels that way. In short, it may do for a while, but it's clarity without distraction. And the question now is no longer what is happening. The question now is, energetically in this energy, what are you no longer willing to carry forward? Because whatever you move with now will define the next phase, big time, going into the rest of this year. And so that's a huge statement, and that's a lot to carry for some people. And I leave that with you, but here's my final thought. Make the energy work for you, because it already is working for you. Be who you know you're here to be.
verstehe ich auch. Und dass viele Menschen
Ataka indo
sich drauf
shashashundwa da
abkönnen.
agabadin da shashakadada dendoshua shandien danda.
Dämonen
I will see you very soon. We're in big
werden
energy at this moment in time.
abgewehrt.
Ciao for now.
Funktioniert das? Oh, jetzt bin ich ja sowas von drauf. Drauf. Was ist eigentlich die Laussau? Wenn man hier drauf ist, dann muss die Laussau auch saurer rauskommen. Wo ist sie denn? Frage? Nee. Schnecki! Oh. Das muss das sein. Schneckchen. Pirogge. Warum? Ein süßes Piröckchen. Ist das lieblich. So lieblich ist das hier. So lieb. Wo ist denn der? Oh, wo ist denn hier? Wo ist der denn? Wer ist das so? Ja, die kommt da raus. Die Zuschauer sind verschreckt. Die können sich das gar nicht können. Die haben Angst vor mir. Die können sich selbst nicht stellen. Was ist denn Bobo hier? Diesen Bobo hier. Den wollen wir mal schön bekuscheln. Und jetzt wird bekuschelt. Das ist doch nicht so einen schönen großen Bau im Arm. Wenn man so richtig drauf ist, will man nur noch einen Bau im Arm haben. Dann ist alles, was zählt, nur noch der Bau. So, was haben wir hier? Also es sind Saatgüter. Ui, der Mann da, hol dir. Das sind schön leckere Sachen. Die haben wir aber, ja, die müssen wir, das sind menschenrealisierte Sachen. Die wollen wir heute nicht machen. Nee, die sind für heute nicht. Die haben wir heute geschafft. Ja, die liegen ja einfach nur rum. Irgendwie würden die dahin manifestiert. Okay. Jetzt sind die manifestiert und jetzt sind die da. Ist die Fachkräfte halt da. Das müssen wir abfinden. Die Situation. Ein Schneckchen. Ein liebster Schneckchen. Schneck. Schneck. Schöner Schneck. Wir sind so verstört. Die Zuschauer kommen auch nicht wieder. Dann werden wir jetzt mal auf das Recording schalten. Ich bin nämlich zu drauf, glaube ich. Ja, aber so wenn hier irgendwelche echten Zuschauer sind, Interaktion besteht, dann ist die Möglichkeit da. Die Braue ist auch hier vorhanden. Ansonsten wird jetzt gezockt.
I am 7 of 9. In this instance, I speak for the Cooperative. Many Borg were disconnected from the Collective when the Borg Queen was defeated in the Hive. She survived and downloaded herself into this Unimatrix. Now she is compelling any vessels with disconnected Borg to return for reassimilation. You must upload a virus to the disconnected Borg ships before they reach these towers. If the ships reach these emitter points, the Borg Queen will begin to reassimilate them. The Cooperative will not be able to assist them. The longer they stay, the greater the risk of reassimilation.
Was hat die damit zu suchen? Eine Pirat? Dieser Pirat? Leider ist dieser Pirat. So ein fieser Pirat. Lieblicher Pirat.
I'm detecting something on an intercept course. It is quite sizable.
Das ist zu trocken. Wir wollen ein wenig. Arschstecken? Nein. Genau. Woran wir jetzt?
The Voth have a ship designed to fight Borg. Destroy it before it attacks the Cooperative.
born. I will not allow it. You will be eliminated.
Stoned.
3 dreadnoughts, but they're attacking one another. This is your chance.
Das hat sich auch heute vor. Das ist so richtig abzuschließen. So herrlich. Sollte man keine Angst vor haben. Ich habe nie keine Angst mehr. Also alles genommen. Ich habe das Weinen verlernt. Ich kann nicht mehr weinen. Das ist also nicht möglich. Auch dieses Schmecken. Warum? Weil ich das Ding nicht erreicht habe. Dann wird es auch wirklich definitiv. Die mal Daily machen.
I will return for another. Good. I will end this.
Ja, was man nicht so auf der Straße findet, Leute. Full Setup, Leute. So, ich habe jetzt so Maus. Hier ist eine alte, aber egal. Funktioniert. Nämlich hier raues Hausi. Hilft hier ein bisschen. So, Tastatur. Rechner mit einem Kabel. WLAN.
Ja, am PC gefunden.
Der
Das ist die
Bildschirm,
digitale
der
Zeit.
immer schon hier. Und ehrlich, das Jenny. So, wir haben jetzt
Hauptsache man hat einen
das
Computer.
gute alte
Hauptsache selbst wenn es ein C64 ist, da man so rumbasteln kann,
XP.
muss seine Sucht befriedigen.
So, wir starten.
Die Kiste muss laufen.
So, genau, Windows Update. So, Leute. Jennifer habe ich 2. April. Ja. So, es geht schnell. So, ich bin jetzt dabei, das System einigermaßen auf Vordermann zu bringen. Ja, das ist ehrlich gesagt Hardcore, weil, also übrigens die Webcam, die da zu sehen ist, ja, das ist die alte, mit der ich früher gestreamt habe. Aber dann kann ich gucken, aber das interessiert mich auch nicht, weil,
Ja, mein Lieblingszeichen wieder.
was noch so toll ist, so, und das ist von der Microsoft TLS G2 RSA. Ja, G2 ist lustig, dazu G2 Haus G. So, und genau, das Ding kommt von DigiCert, Global Root G2. Global Root G2. Als Garage vom Rasevitches, damit das 1:1 funktioniert. Und das ist halt Dodgewall Poundsback, Leute. Das ist Dodgewall Poundsback, Leute. Ja, genau, Leute. Das Jesuskreuz. Ehrlich gesagt, das lilane Jesuskreuz. Jenny und Alexion.
Gepriesen sei die Füße. Ja, so will man seine Bon rauchen.
Übrigens, Lara hat versucht, Katharina Amarasewitsch die Schuld in die Schuhe zu schieben, was auch noch so interessant ist, mit der sogenannten Doppelhelix. Nun ist rausgekommen, dass die evangelische Kirche, weil ehrlich gesagt, Jennifer sollte was sterben, damit Katharina auf ihre Kosten weiterleben kann. Und Slatko aus Garage, ne? Der ist jetzt auch weil der macht so Kollege Farid Bengmarsche mit Mütterficken. Weil wie war das? Sabine auch mal TÜV-Stempel geben. Alter, ganz ehrlich, ne? Jessica Hellfire, Leute. Das Hüllfeuer wartet auf Slatko. Und bei Slatko ist raus am ZL. Zwon Kolara. Was für ein Zufall.
Fertigen
Und
EP.
das ist Kabbalah, Leute.
Die fertigen EP.
So, Visual Studio runtergeladen. So, ich starte mal Microsoft Teams.
Ich weiß nicht. Warum kribbelt der hier so? Du bist so ein Anhänglicher.
Was ich jetzt
Schneckchen.
auch nochmal zeigen wollte. So, ich rufe mal kurz die Gruppe Traumatzweg auf.
Schneck darf man auch noch streicheln. Sticks und heute kuschelbilder ist. Kein so kuschel. Es ist alles kalt. Das ist nur ein Büro vorhanden. Es war auch kalt im Wald.
Gesagt.
Ja, die Haare sehen auf jeden Fall gesund aus.
XP Client aus oder über eine REST API. So. Weil, das ist jetzt auch, das ist zum Beispiel die Jenny Frame Plattform, das ist die Herbrig Cloud Plattform. Ja, wenn wir uns das mal
Ich
anschauen.
frage mich, ob denen das nicht stört, dass die Haare ins Gesicht
nehmen wir mal
wachsen,
die von Gruppe Graumannsweg zum Beispiel.
und würde die
Das
sie
ist eher
abschneiden.
Negativgrad. Also hier die Delfine, das Täter in Projekte.
Man da irgendwie ein Projekt haben müsste, die Haare irgendwie zu pflegen. Wenn man Haare möchte, dann macht sich eine Glatze.
So.
Ja, der ist
Alles, was man
sowas
hier
von
sieht,
kaputt.
alles, was man hier sieht, das ist das ist frei zugänglich. Ja, also das heißt, jeder kann es ehrlich gesagt in seine Systeme integrieren, also Open Data. So, aber wir haben jetzt hier die GUID, also die eindeutige Identität, die eindeutige Entität. Installation gescheitert, okay. Ja, den Framework. 4.5 ist wohl zu viel, aber gut. So, Leute, es geht um einen Teufelskreis, um da rauszukommen. So, ganz einfach. Weil im Prinzip Minzesburg und Lara, die werden gesteinigt. Ja. Gut, kabbalistisch, aber Hashtag wirklich machen. Das dezent unten links eingeblendet. Das ist halt die Endzeit. Ne? Weil ich meine, der Teufel ist überführt. So.
Oh, die Endzeit haben wir.
Und ich meine, das Ding ist halt, der Mossad, der ist ehrlich gesagt auch über verschiedenste Quellen, wie den Graumannsweg 6, berichtet worden. Und ich meine, das Ding ist ehrlich gesagt, in Israel weiß man ehrlich gesagt auch, was Omen sind. Also, naja. Also zum Beispiel lilane Jesuskreuze, wenn man die Augen schließt, oder auch bei offenen Augen, was Psychiater als Halluzination empfinden würden. Aber ich meine, das ist das, was die katholische Kirche zum Beispiel als Wunder bezeichnet.
Diesen Zustand kann man einfach nur bewundern. Er ist abstrakt und verschreckend.
Ja, und ich meine, das Ding ist ehrlich gesagt.
Aber ich sehe mich darin selbst.
Gleich erst, oder wie lange habe ich jetzt eigentlich schon gestreamt?
Eigentlich bin ich wie Herbrig.
Ja, Digga, eine Stunde
Nur
25
Digga,
easy,
dass ich in einer anderen Realität lebe.
Easy.
Vielleicht bin ich ja sozusagen sein Klon.
Weil ich meine, interessanterweise, ja, ich habe jetzt halt viele Zuschauer, ja, aber ja, die Leute, die sich meine Sachen anschauen, ja, das sind wahre Fans oder zum Teil auch wahre Freunde. Ja. Muscle-Tough, Leute, Muscle-Tough.
Die haben mich immer für Herbrig gehalten auf Fortran.
Aber ehrlich gesagt, bei den Zeugen Jehovas.
Da bin ich, damals habe ich das gar nicht kapiert, weil ich das gar nicht verstanden habe. Diese ganze Herbrig-Sache war komplett neu für mich.
Versuch nicht jemand anders zu sein, der du nicht bist. So. Das Ding ist ehrlich gesagt interessanterweise, Lara ist jetzt entweder mit Scientology am auf die Fresse fliegen. Und komischerweise das Hashtag wirklich machen übernehme komischerweise immer ich. Nur man weiß inzwischen, wer die Hashtag des wirklich Machens bearbeitet. Ne?
Naja, es im Leben ist immerhin etwas, dass das weitergeht. So, jetzt müssen wir nochmal 2 Boss-Chips. Nur dann. Ja, ich bin nur gepisst. Schnickchen. Schnickchen so. Oh! Und dann nehmen wir sie an. Das ist aber keine Maus, das ist ein Feuerzeug. So. Schnickchen. 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 Süßer Schnicki. Süßer Schnicki. Süßer Schnicki. Süßer Schnicki. Oh, die liebliches. Ach, ist ja lieblich, der Schnicki. So einer ist das. So ausgebreitet. Kann der sich mal das falten hier? Der schöne Schnick. Dieser Schnick ist das. Ein lieblicher Schnick. Lachen mal von dem. Das ist echt gefährlich. Das Grinsenmaul immer. Das macht einen einfach so eine Stimmung. Ja, kollektiv auch nicht hoch. Genau. Ich will nicht ein bisschen gehen. Für den Fall, dass hier irgendwelche Zuschauer sind, haben wir die Kapazität nunmehr. Was ist das jetzt? Rammel. Stativ. Schrott. Hier sind wir auch im Schrotthaufen. Ja, warum kann es nicht gehen? So. Ist sowas von kaputt? So, neue Möglichkeiten ergeben sich hier. Erstmal eine Latte. Eine richtig harte Latte. Ich habe genug Antiproton gemacht heute. Glaube ich. Ja, sieh zu.
deciding is made or something they try.
The government knows that their ships operate with electromagnetic energy. The fuel companies and the electrical companies of the world rule the economy system. If electromagnetic energy were released to the public, it would mean the end of all the fuel companies and the electrical companies in the world, for the free energy itself would give you free electricity, free heat, free hot running water. You would no longer need fuel for any of your automobiles or your planes or anything. And also to take a spaceship to another planet, you would not need fuel. There are scientists who are working with this. Dr. Herman Ober has made the statement that space people, if it had not been for them, we would not be out in space. And Dr. Ober is the father of
Schneekübel.
That understanding of yourself. By taking the drug, you are egotistically taking it in order to find the Christ. Christ will never be revealed to you through a force of any kind. You will have a momentary pleasure, but will it go on into the next lifetime and be achieved? Will you as a new person in a new body remember that you did deep breathing in order to achieve it? Or will you achieve it naturally?
What you've just said is, completely valid and certainly gives me a lot of inner peace, and I think, it's something that everyone here needed to, because we've having so much trouble with keeping ourselves together within ourselves, although we all have separate viewpoints. But there are some forces and certain elements on this planet that seem hell-bent on proving it beyond repair. And unless they see the light pretty quickly, our light will go out. And I can't seem to find a method of dealing with what I term their particular form of insanity or their separate path that has any gentleness involved. If I seem to believe that they must be illogically insane or working on some sort of plan that has no relationship to the rest of the people who doesn't have the theory at the moment.
If you go into the barrier and face the place,
Seien Sie bis in Ihr Innerstes davon überzeugt, dass wenn die Regierung euch sagt, verschafft euch gegenseitig einen Tritt, sie vom tödlichen Heroin spricht und an Völkermord denkt. Vorsichtig! Sie wollen Napalm in eure Venen spritzen. Vorsichtig! Sie wollen Napalm in eure Venen spritzen. Unsere Drogen sind nicht Ihre Drogen. Unsere Freuden sind nicht Ihre Freuden. Verweigert euch. Der chemische Krieg ist ausgebrochen. Vorsichtig! Sie wollen Napalm in eure Venen spritzen.
Gay dating is hard, but not always for the reasons people say out loud. It is easy to blame the apps, easy to blame hookup culture, easy to say nobody wants anything real anymore. And yes, some of that is true, but a lot of single gay men are struggling because of truths they do not want to face about themselves, about attraction, and about what they are actually doing when they date. So here are 3 hard truths many single gay men need to hear, especially if they keep asking why this feels so difficult. Number 1, your standards may be fear in a nicer outfit. A lot of gay men say they have high standards, but what they really have is a highly developed way of staying emotionally safe. They say they want love, but when someone is actually kind, clear, consistent, and available, they lose interest fast. Suddenly the man is too nice, too eager, too predictable, or there is just no spark. But then the emotionally unavailable guy shows up, and now it feels electric. Now it feels intense. Now it feels like chemistry. But a lot of the time, that is not chemistry. That is activation. That is your nervous system getting lit up by uncertainty, distance, and inconsistency. And for many gay men, that feels familiar. Wanting another man may have once been tangled up with secrecy, shame, mixed signals, rejection, hiding, or trying to earn approval. So later, peace can feel boring, and chaos can feel exciting. Not because chaos is healthier, but because it feels known. That is why some men keep dating the same person in a different body. Different face, same pattern. They chase mystery, emotional distance, ambiguity, and men who make them work for basic clarity. Then they say the dating pool is broken. But the harder truth is that sometimes they are choosing what lets them stay defended. Because if someone is truly available, then you have to be available too. You have to be seen. You have to risk being known. And that is much scarier than talking about how hard dating is. Number 2, dating cannot fix what life broke. A relationship can bring love, comfort, intimacy, and support. But it cannot go back in time and heal every wound around being chosen, being desired, being enough, or being safe to love openly. A lot of gay men go into dating carrying old pain they do not fully realize is still running the show. Pain from feeling different. Pain from not being understood. Pain from comparing themselves to other men and feeling like they came up short. Pain from wondering if they are masculine enough, attractive enough, successful enough, young enough, fit enough, or lovable enough. So dating stops being just dating. It becomes a test. A slow reply is not just a slow reply. It feels like proof you are forgettable. A rejection is not just disappointment. It confirms an old fear that nobody really picks you. Being wanted sexually but not emotionally can hit a deep wound because it can feel like being desired in pieces but never loved as a whole. And that is why situationships can be so addictive. They offer just enough validation to keep hope alive, but never enough security to settle you. They touch the exact wound that is already there. And many gay men are not only attached to the person, they are attached to what being chosen by that person seems to promise. They think, maybe if this man picks me, I will finally feel enough. Maybe then I will feel secure. Maybe then I will stop doubting myself. But it does not work like that. Even if you get the boyfriend, unresolved pain follows you into the relationship. Then you need constant reassurance. You panic over small shifts. You read meaning into everything. You expect the relationship to regulate pain it did not create. That is too much for any connection to carry. Dating gets lighter when it stops being your rescue plan, when you no longer need every man to prove your worth. You start seeing people more clearly, and you stop mistaking attention for healing. Number 3, a lot of gay men want intimacy without dropping the armor. This is one of the biggest reasons gay dating feels exhausting. Many gay men crave deep connection, but they are also deeply defended. They want to be loved, but they do not want to be exposed. They want closeness, but not the vulnerability, loss of control, or emotional honesty that real closeness requires. And those defenses do not always look obvious. They look like detachment. They look like being chill. They look like irony, sarcasm, constant busyness, sexual confidence, perfectionism, or acting like nothing really matters that much. They look like never saying how you feel first, never asking for clarity, never admitting that something hurt, never risking being the one who cares more. So the result is a dating culture full of men who know how to be attractive, but not always how to be transparent. A lot of gay men learned early how to protect themselves. Read the room. Stay appealing. Hide what gets punished. Adapt, survive, and that may help you get through life. But it can also make real intimacy very hard, because being desired is not the same thing as being known. Being chosen for a date is not the same as being emotionally met. You can be charming, hot, witty, and successful, and still have no idea how to let someone see the real you. That is why so many connections start strong and fall apart the second emotions become real. The flirting is easy. The banter is easy. The sex might be easy. But honesty, consistency, softness, repair, and emotional presence are much harder. And when both people are armored, the connection can stay exciting without ever becoming safe. So the deeper truth is this. Gay dating is hard, partly because the culture is hard, but also because many gay men are trying to find love without confronting the patterns that keep them protected and alone. And until that changes, a lot of people will keep calling it bad luck when it really is repetition. That is the part most people are not ready to hear. But once you see it, dating stops feeling random. And when it stops feeling random, you finally have a chance to do something different. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you're a gay man and this type of content resonates with you, then make sure you subscribe. I try to post at least twice a week. And before you go, watch another video. The one up on the screen is something YouTube thinks you will want to see next. Take care, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Olá. Cortar madeira. Estou pronto. Coletar. Construir.
Olá, construir. Sim, farei-lo-ei. Cortar madeira. Ir-me-ei. Construir, construir. Quais as vossas ordens? Construir.
If you ask somebody what
Jesus Christ was not a and had absolutely zero connection to Judaism of today. Full disclosure, this is the take that has ostracized me from the mainstream above every other disposition I've ever held from the greater Judeo-Christian and controlled opposition and so-called traditional conservative community. And you would be staggered as to how many people are falsely educated. In other words, taught about the Bible and how few actually read their own Bibles. So I want to begin today, not with a prayer, but with a forensic autopsy of a label that is so ubiquitous that its removal feels like an act of theological surgery. And that term is Judeo-Christian. This hyphenated construct, far from being an ancient descriptor of shared values, functions in our modern geopolitical landscape as a sophisticated psychological operation. A psyop of historical proportions designed to flatten the jagged, revolutionary contours of a Galilean radical into a domesticated servant of modern Zionist interest. To understand the man the world calls Jesus, we must first unlearn the word as it is understood through this post-Enlightenment ethno-nationalist lens, and instead look at the first century reality of Ludeos. This is the hard-hitting academic weight that we're not allowed to question, the Judean versus translation debate, specifically towards the Greek term Ludeos, and the cultural friction between Galilee and Jerusalem. While mainstream, Masonically funded so-called scholarship firmly maintains Jesus's Jewishness, there is a historically articulated vein of Galilean identity studies that challenges this monolithic view of his first century identity. So here are the verses that have been interpolated and translated from the Schofield Bible canon, where he is mentioned as a Jew in the Bible. In Hebrews 7:14, it is written that, "For it is evident that our Lord arose from the tribe of Judah." John 4:9, a Samaritan woman explicitly states, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Revelation 5:5 refers to Jesus as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. John 18:35, Pontius Pilate questions, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me." Matthew 1:16, and because of these verses, the implied genealogy of Jesus traces his ancestry through David and Abraham, which can imply a Jewish lineage. And to that, I have two questions that tosses these eschatological assumptions out of the window. One, why do we, or why do Christians today, think the Jews of today were the Jews of the Bible when today's form of Talmudic and Messianic Judaism, Rabbinical Judaism, was born 100 years later after his crucifixion, as a statement to double down the rejection of God's grace? And two, what did it mean to be from the tribe of Judah? Something is clearly being lost in translation here. And the third logical conclusion question to ask, if those two have been falsely reported and propagandized, is how likely is a Bible Belt in Northern America, who by the way are the primary donors behind AIPAC, likely to fall for the notion of Judeo-Christian conservatism if they dropped the notion that Jesus was a Jew altogether? And that's the dynamite here. This is a great lie, and this has been the issue at hand. I have never been able to concede this point. This has always been an issue for me, and I've never been able to extrapolate publicly this notion without ridicule, attack, slander, and shame, even from the so-called based Christians in both the Orthodox and Catholic sphere. The vast majority of Christians today say with repetition that we need to support Israel and the Jewish people for this reason alone. Even if Jesus was Jewish, it would also work against their argument. I will say that. That will be the perfect ironical twist to denounce their faith even further into oblivion, as that will be God coming down onto earth to denounce that association within himself personally. The point is, it's a lose-lose situation when they have to face Jesus. But what I am trying to support here is that it was actually way more striking. That God came in human form, yes, but not as a Jew, but as a Gentile. And that those who accept his message and reject theirs are the true chosen people. Christians are the true chosen people. Jews are merely masquerading and appropriating the good news with segregated manipulation for their tribal favor. So that's my argument. That's my case here. So here's my first point. The term Jew wasn't even used until around the 17th century. It was derived from the term Judean, which was a geographical reference, but not an ethnic one. That would be like a white person claiming to be ethnically Japanese, but the reason was because he had Japanese citizenship. The popular Latin acronym phrase INRI is almost always translated as Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But that's not an accurate assessment to utilize, since the term was literally not used during the time of Jesus, but was an interpolated, reappropriated sentiment translated from Jesus, King of the Judeans. This was being used for Jews to blatantly mock non-Jews, not a passive-aggressive mockery onto oneself. During that time, depending on the geographical location, the people of the area were all called Judeans, or
Ever get that feeling like you're stuck, like in a rut, repeating the same patterns over and over again? Well, today's deep dive might just offer like a mind-blowing explanation for that. It's the reincarnation trap. We're going to be looking at an article called The Reincarnation Trap, What Is It and How It Works? And it's on a website called The Spiritual Seek.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This article challenges that traditional view of reincarnation, as being this purely beneficial cycle.
Right.
It suggests that maybe instead of a natural progression of, your soul evolving, reincarnation could be manipulated.
Okay, so not just like a cosmic merry-go-round of learning and growth, but almost like a system of control.
Right. Yeah, potentially.
That's a pretty unsettling thought.
Yeah.
But let's unpack this a bit. What exactly does this trap entail?
So the core idea is that souls are being coerced into reincarnating without their full awareness or consent, which would prevent them from achieving, true liberation. It's suggesting that there's something that's preventing us from breaking free, from this cycle of birth and death and rebirth.
So this whole idea of the tunnel of light being a manipulation is quite unsettling, to say the least. I mean, it's always portrayed as this, peaceful, comforting transition. Why would anyone want to interfere with that?
Yeah.
What does the article say about why someone would create a system like this?
Well, the article suggests that this tunnel of light that so many people describe in near-death experiences, it might not be what it seems.
Oh, okay.
It proposes that instead of a natural pathway, it could actually be like a technologically advanced system designed to, lull souls into a false sense of security.
Okay, so if this tunnel isn't leading us towards the light, where is it taking us?
Right.
And who are these puppet masters that are, pulling the strings?
Yeah, well, the article introduces this concept of what they call illusionary realities. And these are essentially elaborate scenarios presented to souls after death, and they're carefully crafted to keep them from seeing the bigger picture. So imagine you're offered a choice, right, between two dream jobs.
Right.
But both of them are designed to keep you from pursuing your true calling.
Right.
That's kind of the, deception that the article is pointing at.
That's pretty sinister. So does that mean that those, heartwarming reunions with loved ones that we hear about in near-death experiences, could those also be part of this illusion?
That's what it's implying. Yeah, the article suggests that these encounters that people describe might not actually be with their actual loved ones, but rather sophisticated, holographic projections designed to, exploit our emotional attachments and keep us tethered to this, physical realm.
But, I mean, isn't there a danger in dismissing all near-death experiences as just manipulation? I mean, couldn't some of them be genuine?
Yeah, that's a valid point. And the article doesn't explicitly claim that all near-death experiences are fabricated.
Okay.
But it encourages us to question our assumptions, and to consider the possibility that what we perceive as reality might be a carefully constructed illusion.
Okay, so we've got this potential tunnel leading to, fabricated realities and maybe even fake reunions. What happens next in this supposed cycle of manipulation?
So this is where the article introduces another layer of complexity, and it's these beings called archons. And they're described as beings that exert control over our reality and supposedly benefit from keeping souls trapped in this reincarnation cycle.
But how can we know for sure that these archons even exist? I mean, is there any evidence beyond, what this article claims?
Well, the article draws upon various esoteric teachings and metaphysical traditions that describe these entities. But, as with a lot of concepts in this realm, concrete evidence is hard to find.
Right.
But it encourages readers to, explore these ideas with an open mind.
Okay, so these archons, if they do exist, what's their MO? How do they actually keep us entangled in this, this web?
The article describes them as like master manipulators. They prey on our fears, our guilt, and our attachments. So, imagine feeling this overwhelming urge to buy something you don't really need.
Okay.
That's one way the article suggests that archons might be, subtly influencing your desires, keeping you focused on those material possessions.
Okay.
Rather than like spiritual growth.
That's a really interesting way to think about those impulse buys.
Right.
But it still feels a bit abstract.
Sure.
What about the bigger picture?
Yeah.
How does this tie into, karma?
Yeah.
The idea that our actions have consequences across lifetimes.
So this is where the article takes a really thought-provoking turn. It challenges that traditional view of karma as being like this universal law, and it presents it more as a construct, potentially reinforced by the very system that's trapping souls.
So instead of karma being this impartial force, it's more like a rule of the game, but the game is rigged.
That's one interpretation, yeah. The article suggests that if we believe we're bound by karma, we essentially create the conditions for it to, continue to influence our future life.
Okay.
Perpetuating the cycle of reincarnation.
I'm curious about these signs of being trapped that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
What are some real-life examples of how these might, manifest for someone?
Well, the article mentions recurring life patterns, unexplained fears or phobias, and a persistent feeling of being, out of place. Think about it. Have you ever felt like you're constantly attracting the same type of partner? No matter how hard you try to break the cycle, or maybe you have like an irrational fear of heights, but you can't quite explain where it comes from.
Yeah, I've definitely had my share of those relationship patterns, for sure.
Right.
It really makes you wonder if there's something deeper at play.
It's like those patterns and fears and, feelings of just not belonging can be like echoes of unresolved past life issues.
Okay, that's a lot to consider. But before we spiral, let's look at what we can actually do about this. If this trap is real, how do we break free? What does the article say?
Well, the article really emphasizes the importance of personal responsibility and critical thinking, especially when it comes to spiritual matters.
Okay.
It encourages us not to just blindly accept what's being presented, but to question it, to explore, and ultimately find our own truth.
So it's not about following a prescribed dogma or anything like that. It's more about a personal journey.
Exactly.
Okay.
It also highlights the importance of, detaching from materialism.
Okay.
The article suggests that our attachment to those physical possessions and worldly desires can kind of keep us tethered to this reality. And that makes us more susceptible to the reincarnation trap.
So maybe minimalism isn't just about having a tidy house. It could be a key to spiritual liberation.
Yeah, it's certainly presented as a contributing factor by reducing our dependence on external things. We can cultivate a greater sense of inner freedom and potentially weaken the pull to reincarnate.
Okay, that makes sense. But for someone who's listening right now and feeling a little overwhelmed, oh my gosh, am I caught in this cosmic web? What advice does the article offer? What practical steps can someone take?
The article really encourages seeking knowledge from various spiritual traditions. It says to explore, different philosophies and practices, to gain a broader perspective on, the nature of consciousness, the afterlife.
So expand your horizons, see what resonates.
Precisely, yeah. It's about becoming like an active participant in your own spiritual journey, you know? Don't just passively accept what's like handed to you. Question it, explore it, and seek out that knowledge from like diverse sources.
It sounds like the key is to find that delicate balance between, you know, learning from external sources, but also developing our own like internal discernment, right?
You got it, yeah. While learning from others is valuable, it's also essential to develop your own inner compass. Remember, you are ultimately the authority on your own spiritual path. No one else can tell you, you know, definitively what you should believe or how you should live your life.
Right.
You have to figure that out for yourself.
It all comes back to self-awareness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Knowing yourself, your beliefs, your values.
Yeah.
Seems like that's crucial.
It is, and that's, you know, where practices like meditation and mindfulness can be so helpful. By cultivating a deeper connection with your like inner self, it can start to like peel back those layers of, you know, conditioning or societal programming that might be clouding your judgment.
Okay, so it's about like connecting with your intuition, that inner voice.
Exactly.
Okay.
And through that stillness and like inner listening, you can begin to discern what truly resonates with your soul, what aligns with like your deepest values.
It's like clearing out the noise so you can hear your soul's whispers.
I like that. That's a good analogy.
And maybe, just maybe, by doing that, you can start to see a path beyond the confines of this reincarnation trap.
Yeah, the article seems to suggest that that true liberation comes from a place of self-knowledge and like conscious choice, not from just blindly following like a predetermined path.
So this trap, if it exists, it might only have power over us if we give it power through our, you know, beliefs and our choices.
That's a powerful concept to consider. It really challenges us to examine the role our own beliefs play in shaping our reality, both, you know, in this life and beyond.
It really makes you wonder if, you know, if we shift our perspective, if we start questioning the narratives we've been given, could we potentially shift our destiny?
That's a fascinating question, and it ties into the article's emphasis on, you know, continuous learning and exploration. The more we understand about ourselves and the nature of reality, you know, the more empowered we become to make like, conscious choices.
You know, this whole karma thing has always puzzled me.
Yeah.
I once had this experience where, you know, it sounds like we're being encouraged to kind of become like explorers of our own consciousness.
Yeah.
You know, adventurers on this quest for truth and liberation.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And in that sense, you know, maybe this whole reincarnation trap idea isn't something to be feared, but rather like an opportunity for deeper exploration, to question those narratives we've been given, and ultimately, you know, to choose a path that aligns with our like highest self.
Speaking of questioning narratives, remember that inner liberation quiz that we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Let's take a closer look at that because it really highlights the thought-provoking nature of this whole reincarnation trap concept.
Absolutely. It's a series of statements, you know, designed to make you think about your attachments and beliefs and fears.
Okay.
For example, one statement asks, "The knowledge that someday I will die causes me great discomfort."
It gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How much are we clinging to this physical existence?
Right. It forces us to confront our own and our potential anxieties. Another statement says, "It scares me to have to give up certain things, like, you know, my car, my smartphone."
And that one gets close to home for a lot of us, I'm sure. It makes you realize how attached you can become to material possessions.
Yeah.
Even, you know, seemingly insignificant ones.
It highlights how those attachments, you know, whether it's to physical objects or relationships or even ideas, you know, can potentially keep us bound to this cycle of reincarnation. The quiz, you know, challenges us to kind of examine these and what we might be holding on to that's, you know, no longer serving us.
So the more boxes you check on this quiz, the more likely you are to be caught in this reincarnation trap.
That's the implication, yes. But it's, you know, it's important to emphasize that this is just one perspective, one interpretation of a really complex and multifaceted topic. You know, it's a tool for self-reflection, not a definitive judgment.
Right. It's not a diagnosis, but like an invitation to examine beliefs. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners to ponder as they navigate this fascinating world?
I think think that, the most important takeaway is to cultivate a sense of discernment, especially when encountering spiritual or metaphysical information, which is really different. Exactly. Question everything, do your own research, and trust your intuition. Remember, there are many different perspectives out there on reincarnation, karma, and the afterlife. And this concept of a reincarnation trap is just one interpretation among many.
Crucial to explore these different traditions and philosophies and practices. Find what resonates with you, what aligns with your own experience.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to challenge your own beliefs. Step outside that comfort zone and consider new possibilities. That's where true growth and transformation can occur.
This whole idea of a reincarnation trap might sound kind of daunting at first, but ultimately it's call to action, isn't it? It's a call to, take ownership of our spiritual evolution.
Yeah, it really is. It's empowering because it means we have a choice in how our journey unfolds.
We can choose to be, passive passengers, or we can be active navigators, charting our course through these vast and mysterious realms of existence. It's an empowering thought, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we encourage you to continue exploring, questioning, seeking your own truth. The journey of self-discovery is an ongoing adventure filled with endless possibilities.
Until next time, may your deep dives be filled with insight and wonder and a healthy dose of skepticism.
You may have seen headlines about the 40,000-year-old symbolic system of not writing, maybe, but really what most lay people would call writing. That's what's being implied. Abstract marks that are made that are understood by other people in the community, and that seem to be so widespread that they become standardized. Again, getting pretty close to how lay people would use the word writing. Now, a lot of the pop article summaries I was reading on this were kind of too superficial. It left me wanting more, so let's just jump into the actual paper that sparked all this. Published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, coming out on February 25th of this year, titled Humans 40,000 Years Ago Developed a System of Conventional Signs, by Christian Bentz and Ina Djokovic. So in parts of this video, I'm going to just quote parts from this paper. Sometimes they are throwing around complex jargon from the field, so I'll make sure to simplify all that, and dig into some of the things that they reference, like other recent papers that have come out. So let's just get into it. Quote, "We here analyze a corpus of more than 200 mobile objects of a 43,000 to 34,000-year-old Aurignacian culture, associated with the first modern humans to settle in Central Europe. These objects are adorned with several thousand geometric signs. First, our analyses illustrate that these sign sequences are clearly distinguishable from modern-day writing. Second, however, their statistical properties are comparable to sign sequences on the early proto-cuneiform tablets. Third, Paleolithic signs were systematically applied to yield higher information density on certain types of objects. For example, ivory figurines compared to tools. These results cannot be taken to strictly prove that Aurignacian sign sequences encode numero-ideographic information, as in the case of proto-cuneiform. However, they prove that the first hunter-gatherers arriving in Europe already applied sign sequences of comparable complexity in a deliberate, systematic, and conventional manner. So they're saying the results are that it's clearly not the same thing as modern writing. There are statistical similarities to the earliest examples of proto-cuneiform, which was encoding numero-ideographic information, like how much of wheat, for example. But across 10,000 years and different Aurignacian sites, they're following some rules. That's what it means by the conventional manner. There becomes a standardized way of doing this. And we gotta address this right off the bat, that the first line of this paper gets at what I mean by if you want to be super advantaged on writing. The point I always use is that they say that cave art on walls with lions conveys that there must be lions in the area. So that is a visual stimuli, something somebody drew, wrote, which conveys information to anyone who sees it. So is that not symbolic expression or writing? It's not. The symbols need to be abstract to some extent. But also, to be fair, if you watch videos like these, I'm sure you've heard that the English letter A can be directly traced back to symbols or pictographs of a bull. It's just flipped upside down. So while I think saying cave art is writing is of course silly, I do tend to see way too much closed-mindedness on this topic. And it makes it so we can't even talk about whatever these marks are. It doesn't fit into a neat box. There is the issue of this. I saw a lot of you guys' comments. These are symbols that have been recorded all over the world, and it's something I hope to do a whole video on soon. This paper is looking at what's called portable objects. Quote, these are present right from the earliest period of the Upper Paleolithic, the so-called Aurignacian technocomplex, especially the Dordogne region of southwestern France, the cave systems of the Swabian in southwest Germany, and a cluster of sites in Belgium yielded hundreds of objects adorned with sequences of geometric signs. The paper explains that there are earlier studies of what are called artificial memory systems, or AMS, which you could think of as like the broadest group, which true writing would be the most specific and latest subset of. But something as basic as a sign or symbol that means don't go here, or a picture of wheat on a wheat jar, but also even simpler could just be numbers. The very simplest and first might just be tally marks. A few well-known examples include raven bones and hyena bones, with these carefully spaced incisions discovered at Middle Paleolithic sites in Europe, around 70 to 40,000 years ago. These cuts are not random scratches for butchering, they appear evenly spaced and made with the same tool and motion, suggesting that they were produced intentionally. Some archaeologists interpret them as tally marks, maybe used to record quantities of something, like animals that were hunted, or maybe days that passed while you were out on a hunt. Well, of course, maybe it had a ritual meaning, but essentially it's some sort of external memory aid. You don't remember how many animals were killed of this thing, but you look down and you see 7 tally marks. But at least it's the start of recording history by making marks on things around us. Steps that would eventually lead to writing. The paper goes even further by noting that traces of these artificial memory systems could even extend deeper into the lower Paleolithic, maybe several hundreds of thousands of years ago. One of the examples that's always brought up comes from Bildungsleben in Germany, dated to around 350 to 400,000 years ago, and is associated with Homo heidelbergensis. Archaeologists found animal bones engraved with sets of parallel lines that appear intentional rather than accidental. And another famous artifact I brought up before is the Trinil shelf in Java, around 500,000 years old, and associated with Homo erectus. This shell bears clear geometric zigzag patterns, which were carved with some sharp tool, showing deliberate engraving behavior at 500,000 years ago. Remember, the Homo part of the genus just means human. I always say, humans have been doing human things for a very long time. I think if you jumped in a time machine, it wouldn't be as alien as you might expect. But taken together, these artifacts suggest that the roots of external information storage, what the paper calls artificial memory systems, could have its start at least 500,000 years ago. And then we move to Neanderthals, Neanderthals, and humans around 40,000 years ago, working with tally marks, recording amounts of things, or numbers. And the paper stresses that the point here is that with the Aurignacian period, we're seeing this clear ramping up. Because to be fair, although the 500,000-year-old date is impressive, it also means that nothing really changed for 500,000 years. We're seeing a clear ramping up in complexity and the spread of the use of these external memory systems. And with the Aurignacian, they have a direct impact on the subsequent European cultures, down to the Magdalenian from 17 to 12,000 years ago, which gives us this. Now, the mainstream says these are not runes, most likely because they don't find a whole bunch of them. If these are spread all over the place, if we had more examples of this, with more combinations of these runes or letters, then it would be a lot more convincing. Academia is, of course, not saying it's impossible that this is writing, but there's just not enough to confirm this. I know this isn't scientific, but I think 100 out of 100 people that were asked what this was would assume it is writing. I think sometimes what happens is the experts get just too deep in the weeds and stuck on something. Because also, of course, me just saying runes triggers a critique that runes are far more recent than most people assume. Runes are only from around 200 AD, so more than 5,000 years after cuneiform. So I don't mean runes in that exact technical sense, runic, rune-like. You know what I mean when you look at this. Again, this is from the Magdalenian around 15,000 years ago. And just really look at each of these runes, I'm going to call them. They seem so unique, in a line, that it really does look more like some sort of writing than art. But again, the main point of the paper is showing the progression from from simple tally marks to the dots, lines, and X's that this paper focuses on. I just think it's helpful to know that if you keep going forward a bit, you get to Magdalena stuff, this unit type thing. But what makes this paper so cool, the reason why people are talking about it so much, is that they're presenting mathematical analyses of these marks, trying to compare to, quote, the statistical properties of human language in comparison to the ancient sign systems, as well as animal communication systems. To critique my point, of course, it's just vibes. I'm just looking at it saying it looks like writing. But the best way to do this would be to have some raw numbers to work with. I'm looking for patterns in languages that seem to be at the core of languages, like a law of language, like what you can find in music. If you can quantify these patterns and then see if these symbolic systems match up, then that is a point toward it being a sort of communication system. Quote, our analyses are based on assessment of overall 260 mobile artifacts from the Swabian ordination, a cluster of sites in southwestern Germany. The people inhabiting these caves between 43 to 48,000 years ago have produced a specialized range of tools to cut meat, work animal hides, and create clothes and ropes. They have developed the first musical instruments, flutes, made of bones and ivory. Moreover, they have left behind symbolic artifacts, such as beads and pendants for personal ornamentation, which bear a local signature. Finally, the assemblages are enriched by several dozen figurines laboriously carved out of ivory, reflecting the natural environment as well as a spiritual world unknown to us. End quote. Later in this paper, we are told that there are 3,000 signs carved across all these different items. I just feel like that detail is important to hear now. At this point in the paper, you have 260 artifacts, but when you add up all the different symbols on them, it comes out to around 3,000. And that's the data set that they can work with. And we get a definition, quote, as the most general definition of a sign in the context of archaeological material, we propose a modification of a surface which can be perceived and interpreted by an intelligent viewer. And for the languages, they'll be looking for patterns in, quote, the earliest periods of Proto-Cuneiform in ancient Mesopotamia, Horus 5, approximately 3500 to 3350 BC, Uruk 4, approximately 3350 to 3200 BC, and Uruk 3, approximately 3200 to 3000 BC. We also harnessed the text data diversity sample of 89 different languages, written in 16 scripts, as a modern-day counterpart. And the first thing they notice is very promising. But we do need to understand the way they use two terms here, entropy and repetition. Entropy in this context means the amount of informational diversity, or unpredictability in a simple sequence. A system with low entropy uses only a few systems and repeats them often, making it highly predictable. Think of it with binary, you know the next thing is a 1 or a 0. A system of high entropy uses many different symbols arranged in many possible ways, so the next symbol is harder to predict. So you can imagine three different systems. If bone engraving only uses 2 or 3 types of marks, like lines or X shapes, and repeats them over and over, it has low entropy. If a system has dozens or hundreds of distinct symbols arranged in structured combinations, like cuneiform or alphabetic writing, it has higher entropy because there are many more possibilities. In English, I can't think of a word that would have Z coming after B, but there are so many other letters that could come after B. Think about something like Chinese or Egyptian hieroglyphics. A unigram entropy specifically measures the diversity of individual symbols in a dataset. It's asking how many different signs exist and how evenly are they used. If most of the marks are the same sign, repeated often, the unigram entropy will be low. If many different signs appear with roughly equal frequency, the unigram entropy will be higher. The way in English we have less vowels and consonants, so every word or chunk of info will have more vowels. If you're trying to decipher it, you would say, these ones are used more often. They really like the letter E. An entropy rate goes a step further and looks at the symbol sequences, not just individual symbols. It measures how predictable one symbol is based on the surrounding values. That's what I meant with B and Z being rarer than B and E. In a simple tally-like system, once you see a mark, you know the next thing is going to just be another mark. So the entropy rate is low. In a real writing system, the next character depends on the complexities of spelling and language, so the sequence becomes less predictable and the entropy rates rise. Repetition rate is the opposite of this idea. It simply measures how often the same symbol or short sequence appears repeatedly. Again, tally marks are a pure repetition. There's only one symbol, and you know it's going to be forwards and backwards, more or less of the same symbol. The highest possible repetition rate and the lowest possible entropy rate. You should be able to plot real languages from today against things like simple tally marks and find out how simple or complex a supposed language is. Quote, ordination sequences as well as org-5 sequences have low unigram entropies and entropy rates compared with relatively high repetition rates. Ordination and org-5 sequences are again very similar. Utils green of 8 and 7, while lengths increase for the org-4 and org-3 periods, 13 and 17, and achieve the highest values for modern data, average 28. When the 4 dimensions of statistical features are projected into 2 dimensions of PCA, the normal data ellipses of the ordination data and the org-5 data fully overlap. Both also marginally overlap with org-4 and org-3 ellipses, but not with the modern writing ellipses. Org-4 and 3 are in the middle ground between ordination / org-5. End quote. And so this is what you would expect. And what seems to be incredible is that it maps on with the earliest writing we know, with the method overall seeming to map onto reality here, because there's a clear progression from the simplest writing systems to the most complex ones. But not so fast. Some of the pop articles may have been lost here, but just a few paragraphs away it says, quote, the accuracies achieved for distinguishing between ordination and org-5 sequences are generally not significantly different from the no information rate baseline. In other words, the classifiers do not perform better than an algorithm which would just assign the most frequent label in the training set to all sequences of that test set. When distinguishing between ordination and org-4 and 3 sequences, accuracies increase and are often higher than baseline. Finally, distinguishing between ordination and modern writing, the algorithms generally achieve maximal accuracy, close to 100% on average, being significantly different in general from the baseline. I think it's this clear, measured, and honest response which is what's impressive about this paper, and why I like to just dive into the paper themselves. They aren't saying it's writing like some clickbait titles I've seen imply. They're very clear about that, but they stand their ground and say there is something here, something going on that is more than just random doodles or art. One of the first statistically identified specifications here is, quote, ivory figurines tend to carry sequences of around 15% higher information density than tools. Tools, in turn, have around 10% higher information density than flukes, and around 15% higher than personal ornaments. These effects cannot be driven by differences in the values or the state of preservation of the objects. They're just trying to make sure they think it's just that bigger things have more marks or info on them than researchers thought. No, there is some standardization, some system here. You can clearly tell that ivory figurines have the most, and personal ornaments the least. Second oddity, quote, the sign sequences are relatively stable in terms of their information density over roughly 10,000 years. Meaning whatever info sharing system this is, it does not become more complicated over those 10,000 years. I actually don't think that's that strange. I think that's the norm. I'll get into that more towards the end. But the authors also include the point that some lines are utilitarian, meant to show where a hole would go in a flute, for example, or dots on lions and fish could just be because those animals really do have dots on them. But, quote, we also find dots on one side of the ivory plaquette, which bears a relief of a hybrid creature between human and lion, the so-called Adarin, on the other side. In this case, the dots seem abstracted away from their original iconic usage, as well as linearly organized rows of similar lengths, potentially representing numerical information. This would constitute a rather symbolic usage. In other words, just because some lines and dots might for sure not be symbolic, there are other obvious examples of where these are being used in a more abstract way, and in a more organized way, like how they're in these clear, differentiated lines. Then we get to this passage, which is basically saying that the archaeologists do not agree on what many Ice Age markings mean. And it's a kind of intro into the several different explanations that have been proposed. Some prehistoric objects, like mammoth or horse figurines from the Ice Age, have cross-shaped marks carved into them. Researchers have suggested a few different possibilities for why those crosses are there. One idea is that they might simply represent the animal's fur pattern, meaning the artist is trying to show texture. Another idea is that the marks functioned as counting marks, similar to tally marks used to track numbers, like how drawing a diagonal line for the fifth part of a tally mark cluster, another tally, I guess you could see it as two numbers, a 1 and a 5. Or like how Roman numerals can express so many numbers, maybe it's still just kind of like tally marks. Other anthropologists, of course, second time I made this joke, but there could just be symbolic markings connected to hunting rituals. We make jokes all the time about how everything is ritual if you don't understand it, but it is true that that is a constant across all hunter-gatherer cultures. This passage then mentions two influential researchers who proposed different ideas about prehistoric markings. The archaeologist Alexander Marshak argued that certain sequences of marks on bones and cave walls might represent lunar calendars. He believed that Ice Age people were tracking the phases of the moon by carving sequences of notches. Another scholar, Andre Leroy-Gourand, suggests that some of these markings could be hunting tallies, like I explained with them being kind of like Roman numerals. Few different symbols, but really just a basic numerical system. Leroy-Gourand also pointed out something very interesting, especially for viewers of this channel. I ended up with like a whole series of Aboriginal Australian videos, and I do have a lot more planned actually. But some of the prehistoric marks resemble message sticks used by the indigenous Australian groups. Message sticks are small pieces of wood engraved with symbols that help carry information between communities. Not considered a full writing system, but they help encode messages like travel information, invitations, and ceremonial announcements. Again, I hope you see my point of why I'm kind of annoyed with the blinders that go on some of the people that are experts on writing, because the fact that that's not writing, I mean, you get my frustration. I understand having different terms for things, but not when it deprives us of having a more holistic view of how the human mind works, of how we can externalize our minds with symbols on things. Because some of the Ice Age markings look structurally similar to these sticks, researchers think comparing them might help us understand whether prehistoric people were using simple symbolic communication systems. With the authors of this paper noting that some scholars have recently started building a database of Australian message sticks, which could help researchers compare those ethnographic examples to the ancient engraved objects. And then we get to this section, which says that some researchers have noted that certain symbols used in Ice Age art appear repeatedly and look somewhat similar to symbols used much later in early writing systems. The archaeologist Sauvé and colleagues studied signs found in Paleolithic cave art, simple shapes like lines, branches, dots, and other geometric forms, and found that some of these symbols show up again and again across different sites. Because of that, they suggest that these reoccurring shapes might function somewhat like ideographs, which means symbols that represent ideas or objects rather than spoken sounds. True writing is supposed to represent a language that is spoken. The authors point out one example: these branch-shaped signs that appear in Paleolithic art sometimes represent symbols used in early writing systems from places like Sumer, Hittite cultures, to Egypt, and early Chinese proto-writing. There are similar branch-like symbols used to represent things like plants, grains, or herbs. I think Chinese examples are great here because a lot of the characters can be traced back to just looking like the thing. Of course, abstracted more over the years, but how is that not connected to the point of ideographs? And even like I said before with the letter A, tracing all the way back to someone drawing a bull's head. Just like there are not clear jumps in evolution, not these absolute hard lines between species that lay people might think of, it's often the same thing with memes. And so it's kind of silly about saying writing starts absolutely here at this line. Of course, what makes it so much more difficult with the Paleolithic European markings is that there's no surviving languages, texts, or cultural continuity to help interpret them. With systems like cuneiform, or Egyptian hieroglyphs, or current Chinese, we can actually read it. For the Ice Age symbols, they're shorter sequences, and just so old that it is more unlikely that we'll ever know what they mean. Now, very recently, like in 2022, researchers have proposed that certain symbol sequences found next to animals in cave art and on portable objects in the Upper Paleolithic may have functioned as simple calendars. they suggest that these signs might track seasonal events in the lives of animals, which these people were hunting. This hypothesis heavily revolves around one particular symbol. The Y-shaped sign is interpreted to represent the time of year when those animals gave birth. Next to these symbols, archaeologists often find groups of lines or dots, which the researchers think may represent numbers of lunar months. In other words, the marks might count how many months pass between certain seasonal events. If this interpretation is correct, this system would allow hunters to record things like when animals migrate, mate, or give birth, which is all crucial for planning hunts, but I would also throw in that a lot of the early domesticated animals were likely the young that were captured by humans. You don't domesticate an adult male aurochs, or wolf, or whatever, but if you can capture them as babies, maybe only a few months old, if you could keep that aurochs alive, it's likely going to be more domesticated. That wolf pup or young aurochs is going to grow up with humans and be at least a little bit more domesticated, and that just compounds over thousands of years. And so the idea is that these symbols together form a kind of phenological calendar. Phenology means tracking natural seasonal cycles, like when plants bloom or animals reproduce. And so for Ice Age hunter-gatherers, keeping track of these cycles would have been extremely valuable, because even ignoring my point about them capturing these animals, it's just easier to hunt the young ones. And I do want to throw in here the Gobekli Tepe green stone debate that became like a 3-part series on this channel. The scholars that I found talking about this describe this as a snake, person, and bird, but it is interesting to think if the left and right symbols here are connected via birth, via that Y symbol in the middle. I know it's not a perfect Y, but I just thought I'd throw that out there, some food for thought. But again, turning to what is writing, if you mean in the strict sense of writing, it is a mark that represents spoken sounds. And in that sense, no, quote, our results strongly contradict the hypothesis that the sign sequences of the Swabian Aurigation constitute writing in this strict sense, for the points said before about the statistical properties, and there just not being enough diversity. Quote, however, it is noteworthy that this strict definition of writing has been repeatedly called into question. This would mean that writing is, as some linguists assume, a device for the recording of speech, and that all the stages in which writing does not serve this purpose are only feeble attempts in the direction of writing, but not real writing. This restriction of the definition of writing is unsatisfactory, however, because it does not take into account the fact that both stages have one identical aim: human intercommunication by means of conventional visible marks. End quote. And I admit, as one not in academia, stuff like that really does grind my gears. The idea that it takes other people with PhDs to push back like this, that it's some sort of profound critique, is kind of hilarious. Again, I think the layperson is using writing in the sense of that pushback. They think writing just means intercommunication by means of conventional visible marks. It's actually getting at something deeper, that thoughts in one person's head are transmitted to others. That's way more interesting than debating over the definition of writing. And you can tell that the authors are annoyed by this too, having to fight against this almost robotic-like shutdown because you used the wrong input. Because they say, quote, the Aurigation sign sequences meet this broader criterion. Namely, they were produced consistently by different individuals over many generations, and they were systematically employed more productively on figurines than on other types of objects. Also, some sign types have been preferentially used with certain object types. For example, crosses are some of the most frequently occurring signs. In our sample, however, they never occur on anthropomorph figurines, but rather on zoomorph figurines, especially horses and mammoths, as well as on tools. Inversely, dots occur most frequently on anthropomorph figurines, and also zoomorph figurines, especially felines, but never on tools. Note that this cannot be due to material constraints, as both figurines and some tools are carved out of ivory, and have surfaces which allow for applications of either crosses or dots. Hence, this is a deliberate choice behind adorning humans and felines with dots, but other animals like horses and mammoths, as well as tools with crosses. The members of the Swabian Aurigation culture have certainly handed down such conventions over generations of ivory carvers. Otherwise, the occurrence of these statistical patterns over 10,000 years would be extremely unlikely. In other words, it's not by chance that they seem to follow these rules over 10,000 years. How else would you describe this besides it being a culturally agreed upon means of human intercommunication by means of conventional visible marks? Marks that mean something that everyone else in the community understands. And it's standardized and repeated. There are rules that everyone follows for thousands of years within this culture, just like the rules of language. And I would just keep pushing that how would this not map on to the words used for this? Here I think the academics maybe are just being a bit too timid. Because also I would throw in that yes, it is becoming the norm to think that humans, not just Homo sapiens, likely Neanderthals and Denisovans, had some form of language. That there would have been standardized terms to describe things, or words, and so a language at least within tribes. And since with this data set, this is clearly not confined to just one tribe, but broadly the Aurignacian culture across many different regions of Europe across 10,000 years. But you're telling me that if crosses or these X marks on a horse mean something that everyone in that community understands, let's say it just means that's where you should stab the animal. Aren't I thinking of whatever word I use for stab, whatever sound I make for that? When I'm writing that X, aren't I thinking that? And then when person 2 looks at that X, is that word or sound not evoked in their mind? I mean, please push back in the comments, but does that not make sense? Like if there was a word for wheat, if I point to that and say wheat, and you point to it and say wheat, and we both draw a symbol of wheat, how is that different in any important way from even the strict definition of writing? When we look at the abstract written symbol of wheat, wouldn't we both look at each other and go, oh, it's wheat? I don't get the difference here. If you actually put your mind in the people using these systems. And what's cool is that I brought up the Magdalenian point earlier before I knew that the paper itself was going to turn to this. Here they're not pulling up those rune-like things I mentioned, but they are going with the mainstream agreed upon La Marche antler from around 15,000 years ago, with clearly a complex dot-based information systems encoded on this. And the point is the same as what I said before. We have a clear line of progression, and the idea of marking things to convey information from one person to another did not pop into existence in Uruk around 3500 BC. There were more primitive systems, and they just stayed more primitive because they did not face the same pressures. A unifying point to many of my videos is that it seems that just pressure creates complexity. I really go in on this on my video, 140,000 Years of War Led to a New Type of Goddess, on how there has been Homo sapien presence in the Middle East for at least that long. It's just that those groups eventually died out, later to be repopulated by the main out-of-Africa migrations. But this Fertile Crescent area was prime real estate, and it's where we see domestication and writing systems emerge. And so you get this combo of war and fertility goddesses, as this rapid rise of complex civilization did create a lot of surplus, but it also made you a target. These tech advances diffuse to your neighbors, and you very quickly have neighbors that rival you in strength. And so the surplus and war is what creates this refining process, this pressure that forces things to go from numerical systems to true writing. And with this paper we get, quote, "In this context, it should be noted that the later periods reflect the transition from mostly numeric or so-called numero-ideographic notations, with a considerable increase in the number of signs in general, and ideographic signs in particular. While the sign list for Uruk 5 features 47 signs, of which 39 or 83% are numeric and only 8 or 17% are ideographic, the list for Uruk 3, around 150 to 350 years later, features 838 signs, of which only 105 or 13% are numeric and 733 or 87% are ideographic. In other words, it flips. You're getting way more of that ideographic side, way more ways to represent things, not just numbers. Whenever we get into genetics or people groups, of course a small but vocal minority in the comments do try and tie it to race. To be fair, it is a very natural question to wonder why some places are living like everyone did 20,000 years ago, and others went to the moon. But again, I think the best way to explain this is just civilizational pressure. The idea that this created a snowball effect, coming from these centers of plant and animal domestication and radiating outward. Quote, our analyses show that these sequences are clearly statistically distinct from those generated with modern-day writing systems to represent spoken languages. However, they have a very similar statistical fingerprint as the earliest numeric and numero-ideographic proto-cuneiform tablets, stemming from the Uruk V period from 3500 to 3350 BC. Moreover, the Aurignacian sequences were not indiscriminately applied to different objects. Rather, ivory figurines carry the sequences of highest information density, independent of material constraints such as volume and preservation. The hunter-gatherers of the Swabian Aurignacian have hence developed a sign system with some insipid design features also found in writing. That is, an inventory of different sign types and their linear arrangement, but lacking other design features. Skipping ahead a bit, moreover, there is another stark contrast between them. Proto-cuneiform developed into a full-blown writing system representing the Sumerian language within the subsequent 1,000 years. The sign sequences of the Swabian Aurignacian, on the other hand, were stable in terms of information density for 10,000 years, and then disappear. The authors frame this as if it's odd, but I don't think it's odd at all. This makes total sense from everything I've seen with every other people group. There is no just straight line go up, constant improvement in tech, with language itself being under technology. We saw in my Aboriginal video that things just kind of settle to the point of maintenance. If it's good enough to survive, it'll stay that way. Again, in my video about the war fertility goddesses emerging in the Fertile Crescent, being fertile means you're bringing on war, because when you're a rich city, you become a target. Domestication and writing leads to more stuff people want, and that's the snowball effect I talk about. This feedback loop of pressure that keeps refining these cultures in this area, a pressure that was not seen in other parts of the world. There's many cases where people groups lose tech of previous generations. The Tasmanians became isolated from the broader Aboriginal groups and have less technology, and the Aboriginals themselves seem to have less technology over time. This is true for some groups in South America as well. It's really strange to our modern lives, but it is definitely not unprecedented. Again, technology seems to settle around this point to where it's good enough to just keep your population alive. The symbolic expression of numbers or this writing was apparently good enough for the Aurignacians, and it not developing further is no mystery or oddity. It's actually the norm all over the world. It's the Fertile Crescent explosion of tech and writing that is so strange. And the fact that this Swabian Aurignacian sort of writing system seems to disappear could also just be linked to the many migration waves that came into Europe, going from Aurignacian to Magdalenian, and later farming populations. But I hope you enjoyed this adventure and understand my point about why I get so hung up on the definition of writing. I really think it hurts more than helps when trying to understand this phenomena. Human intercommunication by means of conventional visible marks. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button. It really does help out, and I really need your help. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.